Oh, welcome to St. Thomas Church, Fifth Avenue. So it's our paternal feast day. It's also the conclusion of our bicentennial celebrations. We just had a lovely mass at 10 o'clock with all our musicians and lots of people involved. And now we're having a bit of a brunch, and these are the hangers-on. Because what Episcopalians are like. There's food, there's drink, they ain't gonna go. I mean, the space is the thing that people comment on first. This is designed to be like the great medieval Gothic cathedrals of England. It's the same height as Westminster Abbey, same length as Westminster Abbey. That's all very deliberate. And you'll notice it's built in layers. It's all stone on stone. The stones kind of soak up people's prayer. You've got the arcading, you've got the triforium, you've got the clear story, which is a misnomer here because a clear story in medieval churches was always clear glass, clear story, so the light would come in. Ours is filled with glorious glass. And as you walk through, it becomes more and more elaborate until you come to this, the tallest reredos in the world, which lifts your eye to heaven, and that's the whole point. And sometimes people actually get a bit overwhelmed by it if they come from a tradition where they didn't have that. But what is it that connects all the layers, the horizontal and the vertical layers? It's music. Music connects all the layers of this building. And we can use the space dramatically, liturgically, and the music fills it. And of course, there are ups and downs in the liturgy, in the emotions, in the music, and it's kind of connection too, across the centuries, and also looking forward. So people come. Christmas, we can have, 1,400, 1,500 people packed in for several services in a row. So although we unashamedly spend a lot of our time in worship and praise, it's because it's trying to help us to open up our love for the community, for one another, and beyond, in engagement with people who are no longer clients of the soup kitchen, but are our friends and neighbors. The last time we did a count, we get about 300,000 visitors in addition to worshippers. So, we're approaching 450,000 people worshipping and visiting. Unlike some of the other churches in New York, when people come in here, the first thing they do is they rest. Invariably, they rest. They're still. And it's the most beautiful space. We call it an oasis of prayer in the middle of New York. On the busiest shopping street in the world, right in the middle of Manhattan. The noise. Stillness. And that's what we have here. St. Augustine has a little phrase, I used it in my sermon today. Through resting, we shall see. When we shall see, we shall love. When we love, we shall learn to praise. And by resting, by being still, you discover something about God, community, yourself. You can reflect, and that kind of opens up the eyes to something other. And once that's discovered, suddenly you realize that God is drawing you into his love. Once you've got that love, that's when you can praise. And that's what this building is designed for, to lead you to praise. The problem though is And there's a danger when you inhabit a space like this, because we can sometimes forget that these places are to worship in, not to worship. They're here to reveal something about Jesus to everyone who comes in. This is the Shrine of Our Lady of Fifth Avenue. The image was designed by Mother Concordia, a Roman Catholic Benedictine in England. She designed a very, very similar image for Our Lady Undercroft in Canterbury Cathedral. So there are two images like this in the world, one in Canterbury Cathedral and here in, of all things, on Fifth Avenue. The glitz of all the shops, so much that excites, and so much you can spend your money on. And in the middle is the Christ child, Jesus. God emptying himself into the world and inviting people in. And I think it's quite significant that the first thing people see when they come in St. Thomas is Jesus.
I guess we could call this a mid-century modern A-frame. This church was built in the mid-1950s. Some people thought it was practically heretical to make a church in this style at the time. And now it feels just kind of quaint and old-fashioned. Here's our sanctuary space and our altar. All of the wood elements, they were made by local woodworkers. And the pews, you see, they match. And one of the great things about these pews is that unlike in many of our Episcopal churches, they are not anchored to the floor. And so we're able to play with them. And at times we can push pews back and form some pews into a large circle. And we'll have a small altar here and have worship in the round. So we're really grateful to have flexible space and pews that aren't bolted to the floor. And here's our baptismal font. Of course, the waters of baptism are the doorway into the church. So we have the font here as you enter. And it's typically always filled with holy water. And again, made by the same woodworkers. And here's this wonderful window, which once was opaque and didn't allow light in, but now we have creation streaming in through this clear glass. There's a word within the Anglican spiritual tradition, homely, that doesn't mean like we think of it, someone's homely, but the homeliness of God, which is sort of the domesticity of God, God present in the ordinary and the daily and the everyday, and being surrounded by wood, connecting us to the trees, to the forest. It is sort of locating God in the ordinary and the daily. And so some architecture is designed to lift us up, and Gothic cathedrals, and we're being lifted up to the stained glass, to the light, and it's really focusing on the transcendence of God. And I feel like a sort of quaint building like this is focusing on the immanence, the indwelling, the ordinariness of God, that God's here in our midst. Julian of Norwich, who stands in our Anglican lineage, this 14th century English mystic, she used the language of the homeliness of God, and she spoke about full homely divinity. God fully in the homeliness and ordinariness of life. And she was shown in one of her visions a hazelnut in the hand of God. And she was told that it was all that exists, that all that has existed or ever will exist. It was there in that hazelnut in the hand of God. And so to find God it's very Jesus-y, right? Jesus is always finding God in seeds and lilies of the field and birds of the air. He's always pointing us to God in the ordinary and the stuff of life and creation. These parables that don't point us up and out of the world to find God, but that point us down and into the world. And I feel like this church really suits our local community. We're a small town community, and it isn't a large elevated space. And actually, because it's small, you put 70 people in here and it feels very full. So I now see, as the church is changing and as a lot of our churches are growing smaller, I find the smaller building really an asset because it still feels really alive and full with a smaller congregation. And worship is not just an indoor experience only. Worship spills out of the building into these wonderful spaces outside. So this is the outdoor worship space, and you see the trees here, these plane trees, they form really the shape of the church, right? And we have a stone altar. In good weather, we would use it regularly for a smaller midweek service, and we also, in good weather, will have coffee hour in the gardens rather than in the parish hall. Over here we have a community food garden, and for us it really is the connection between Eucharist and food and the earth. You know, that Eucharist is food. And then to remember where it comes from the earth, and here's a garden that connects Eucharist back to its source in creation. We can go straight back to the labyrinth, yeah. During the pandemic, when we did Eucharist outside, we placed the altar beneath this tree. And it was like that was the tree of life springing up behind the altar. At that time during the pandemic, we weren't allowed to receive the chalice. We couldn't share the wine. And so we would consecrate the wine, and then we would offer it to the earth by pouring it at the base of the tree during the liturgy, which was a really sacred, special, profound kind of moment to share communion with creation in that way at a time where we couldn't receive the wine ourselves, but we could give it back to the earth. You know, I'll just say a word too about our tabernacle. It's really the church in miniature. And it's an A-frame tabernacle. And of course, the tabernacle, year-round, we have a sanctuary lamp burning beside the tabernacle as long as there's reserved sacrament in the tabernacle, signifying Christ's presence amidst us, amongst us, right, in the world. And you know, it's a tabernacle within a tabernacle. And I always think of the tabernacle as really an icon of us. Like there's a tabernacle in our hearts. Like we are carrying the presence of Christ in us. And I think we come to church, not because church is set apart from the world, but because church is set within the world. And we come here to be reminded of what the world is.
This is the food distribution of the food pantry here at San Andres. We are here on Mondays to distribute the food. We receive between 10 and 13,000 pounds of food every Monday. So part of it happens in the church. So the worship space gets transformed into also a distribution space. Well, I think it would be hard to argue that what is happening here is not sacred as well, because we are about nurturing and about feeding. Jesus fed 5,000 people. And we are doing the same in modern times. So yes, the food distribution comes into the worship space, and today it's not snowing or raining. If not, this would be all muddy and all over the place, and all these boxes will be wet and it'll be even messier than what it is. And even in that messiness, it's completely sacred because it's about feeding people and about following Jesus's command to do the same. For many years, San Andres was a church known in the diocese by being Spanish-speaking only. We only worshipped in Spanish. And that is certainly true. Our main worship service happens in Spanish here at San Andres. The place of worship is the only place we have. So everything we do, whether it is food distribution, community service, everything happens within our worship space. And of course, that requires us to be flexible in how we envision and conceive worship, and also pushes our boundaries a little bit onto what is considered sacred. We are blessed with a modular space that has chairs and that we can move around and rearrange. But especially in our Episcopal worship, there are things for which our space is great and things for which our space is not. So for example, one of the things that we are trying to do is that we want to have a choir at San Andres, but the space is not big for a choir. And so we've been trying different configurations and trying to see how we can have a choir. It's been difficult, and so far we don't have a choir. We have a soloist that sings for us and plays for us. And there's the desire in the congregation, and certainly mine, to have a choir as an expression of worship and also as a formational opportunity for the congregation. But we are limited in the space. And doing processions like the Great Litany on the first Sunday in Lent. Well, San Andres is not a conducive space for that. We start doing an age around the church, and when we are halfway, you're already bumping into the end of the line. So that's not an option here. And that's certainly a challenge. It's a beloved part of our tradition that it is challenging for us to do here. So we've had to come up with different ways of doing it, and it's a little bit unorthodox. Sometimes you just go around the church, and sometimes it just pushes us to be outside more frequently, because outside there's lots of space for us to do processions rather than inside the worshiping space. The other element in worship that is different at San Andres is that San Andres is located in a neighborhood that it's constantly changing. So many of our neighbors are new immigrants to the United States. They've been here for a number of months, a year, 2 years. They arrive into our neighborhood, and San Andres' place is to welcome and to embrace our neighborhood. And indeed, it happens every Sunday. There is at least 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 families that are new to the church. And that is a blessing. And it may also be a challenge, because there is also a high rotation, meaning that after a couple months, after a couple years, people get a better job, move to a different neighborhood. So there is a lot of movement, and consequently for worship, there is a lot of teaching that needs to happen about the Episcopal Church, about who we are and how we worship, and why is it similar to their previous experience and why it is different than their previous experience. But I think that a sign of change and renewal is that we found in conversation with the families that our Sunday school could grow more if we, instead of offering it in Spanish, we started offering it in English. So as a result of that, even though our main worship service still is in Spanish, and with all the hallmarks of Latino Hispanic worship in the Episcopal Church, our Christian formation for children and youth happens in English. So as a result of that, we saw a big increase in the Sunday school registration numbers, and we just had a big celebration here of baptisms and solemn communions as part of the Sunday school. And that day we had the first in a long time bilingual Eucharist at San Andres. Work is an act of worship, and the ministry that we do here is essential and clearly within God's heart. And I have the conviction that if we are willing to listen to the voice of God, a way will be found for us to continue to offer all these great things that happen here every Sunday. That's not any crucifix. The corpus itself is new, but that cross was the steeple at the old St. Andrew's Memorial Church that burned in 1986, and it is the mother church of San Andres. The mystery of the cross is central to the Latin American experience. So certainly, it's much more common in Latin American churches to see crucifixes in altars. But that particular one has that double meaning. Behind there, you see another crucifix, and that's a special one. But that crucifix is a work art by Archbishop Ernesto Cardenal. He's a Roman Catholic archbishop in the Brazilian Amazon, very well known by his poetry and liberation theology work. And we have this contrast happening. So of course, as a church that worships in the more sort of high church or Anglo-Catholic expression of Anglicanism, there's Santos bells that you know very well, and they're there for the acolyte to kneel and do the bells. But there's also a tambourine at the altar, because when we are worshiping, a part of our communal expression of worship is also a lot of joy and celebration. So there's also a tambourine that I use when I'm worshiping. So we have this a beautiful contrast of the diversity of God's body here at San Andres.